Navier Cartier Tiffany Navier Cartier Tiffany Navier Cartier Tiffany Navier about changing the waterway. Ooh, that's a Navier. Ooh, electric flight and I'm zooming.
Welcome everybody to an episode of the HyperChange podcast. We have a super special guest and we're going to get into some epic, crazy futuristic stuff. We've got Sampriti, the founder and CEO of Navier Flying Electric Boats on the podcast. Sampriti, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just jump right into the exciting and vision part of your company. So Navier builds electric flying boats, which I just spent all day on the water. It was insane, like flying above the water. Tell us why you're building much more than just a flying electric boat, but America's next generation maritime company.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy if you were on the bay, how empty it is, right?
Yeah.
But waterways were really the life veins of the nation. I mean, people used to move goods and people on the water, and civilization was built near the waterways, right? And at the turn of the century, we have had automobiles, and cars became cheaper, highways were built, and the highways replaced the waterways. So we are at a point where we live in coastal cities, which is about 46% of the world, whether that's San Francisco, New York, you name it, are congested. And yet we are thinking of building bridges, tunnels. The waterways are this underutilized infrastructure because we haven't figured out how to move boats cost efficiently and also in a convenient way. So the electric flying boat, I mean, in short, is actually answer to solving those two things, which is the cost issue and the convenience issue when it comes to moving people or goods, maybe, on the water.
So I think what's really cool about your boat is that it's not just a disruption in it's electric. So it's an ultra efficient vehicle compared to the emissions of a traditional gas boat, but it's also a better experience. And that's what really caught my eye. Like full disclosure, I'm an investor in Navier. I think it's such a cool company. Like HyperGuap invested because you're not paying me to do this. It's not sponsored. I actually invested in you. That's how cool I thought it was. But the aha moment for me was like, wow, like this design really allows for the electric boat because you're off the water, so there's less resistance, but it's also a much smoother ride where there's no waves. You're not getting rocked back and forth. It's super quiet. So it almost feels like boating was in beta until I went on the Navier, which is crazy. So can you talk to us about all the innovations that go into the boat and why it's so different from traditional boats?
Sure. So it comes, tying it with the first point is that the question is that, you have all these waterways. So why don't people move on the water? That is, why don't we have high-speed water shuttles? We have ferries. You can think of ferries equivalent to buses, where economies of scales make sense. Fewer terminals, and once in a while, there are ferry rides. But why don't you have high-speed water shuttles connecting various parts of the bay? Let's say Redwood City to Berkeley to East Bay, Alameda. You're going around in the car, what should be a 15, 20 minutes ride, or even a 10 minutes to a 40 minutes, sometimes over a couple hours, right? When you're stuck in traffic. So two reasons, as we talked about. One is cost. So a boat is about, even a small shuttle boat, right, 5, 6, whatever passengers, is 15 times more expensive than a car to drive. So just to give an idea, it's probably 2 miles per gallon versus 30 miles per gallon in a car. So that's the difference. The cost is, ginormous to make sense to, operate at scale. But that's not all. If you look at the Bay Area, it's super choppy. A small boat on choppy waterways, it's a terrible experience. There is seasickness. Are you going to hold on to a boat and, you don't want to commute to work twice like that. So if you could solve those two problems, you actually are able to unlock a whole new kind of transportation network that wasn't possible before. Mm-hmm. So that's where electric hydrofoil comes in. What it does is that, electric hydrofoil boat, first of all, it is 10x cheaper to operate, 10 times cheaper. You're it's the electricity cost, right? But why it is so is that you're not spending all the energy pushing water. It is a plane and a boat, so it be super energy efficient because just like the innovation behind it is that you have wings underwater. So as soon as you reach a certain velocity, you take off, and the whole body of the boat is above the water. So you reduce, you literally eliminate most of the hydrodynamic drag, and so you're very energy efficient. On top of that, the cherry on the top is that you don't actually have to solve the seasickness problem separately. It also solves the seasickness problems because now you're, gliding above waves. I mean, this boat is like, you can go above 4.5 feet of chops, so you don't feel anything. And on the top, it is quiet. I mean, a 30-feet boat, gas guzzling boats is so loud, and you have been on the boat, like you can actually talk, you can play music, and you can listen to each other.
Yeah, that was the big thing for me is the whole experience of like what it is to be on a boat. Just there's a really nice cabin, really comfy seats, really stable, smooth ride. You could even, it's feasible to work on the boat. Yeah. And like you were saying, moving people around the bay, that's such a big opportunity. Navier has actually announced a partnership with Stripe, which is a big reason that you got on my radar. Is I was like, whoa, this is super cool. Like not just, another hype startup showing us a really cool prototype, but moving into production, actually making a difference in the community and moving Stripe employees across the bay. Mm-hmm. Instead of sitting in traffic, these people are just going to be flying across the water, mm-hmm. chilling, working in their quiet cabin. So could you tell us a little bit about that partnership? I feel, congrats, but that's just super exciting. And really curious to learn more.
I'll share a bit about that. The way it started was actually one of the founders, John, actually, he reached out and he was like, well, you have this solution and we have employees who stay in places where there's not a lot of like public transportation. And when they are taking, either their own cars or even like taking the Stripe bus, I mean, you're stuck in traffic. And I think he saw the Waterways as a solution just like, we are seeing it, right? And what I love about Stripe is even though they are, big, almost $100 billion company, they are really, they embrace innovation just like a startup. And I love that biasness to action. Like, hey, you have the solution, let's try it. And I loved it. I was like, hey, we are early. This is still like a, pre-production company where you have this vessel. And, we tried out some pilots with them, like day trials, and they all loved it. And the pilot, the first part of anything, is it's a small step to a much more, bigger scale, bigger mission, which is what is exciting about it, is that, we first want to learn a lot, like, hey, how do people perceive it? How do they like it? And really learning from customers, users. And as you're trying to introduce this technology for for commercial scope of operation, you will learn a lot as you're doing, over 20 miles run every day. So this is awesome to actually work with them, run different routes and also scale, more of the fleet in the bay. What is exciting is, Stripe is located in Oyster Point, which is a home of about 200 different companies, about 20,000 employees. Mm-hmm. And Oyster Point is not very well connected to public transportation. So, I'll tell you one of the routes, which is like Alameda to Oyster Point is, 1.5 hours during rush hour and only 15 minutes across the water.
Yeah. And that seems like the kind of low-hanging fruit that is so exciting for Navier. Like I'm thinking about, I grew up in Seattle, just surrounded by waterways, the lake, the Puget Sound, the ferry system is like a big part of life there. And it's notorious for being horrible. Like you get on the island and then you're worried about like, oh my God, am I gonna be able to get home tonight? Like back to the mainland, Yep. There's just not that many of them. There's not a good reservation system. There's not that many ports. They're like old ships that I think burn like diesel, and then at the same time, all of these governments have mandates of like, how do we get more zero emission vehicles on the road? How do we go electric? So Navier seems like it's coming at such a cool time. And you think about the potential of, I'm always trying to think about like, what's the crazy epic future that we all want? Like coastal cities seem like they have so much untapped economic potential because of congestion and traffic and not being able to seamlessly kind of, adapt to the environment. Like here there's land, here there's water. Let's try and get around that water efficiently. Like it blew my mind when I was like, wow, Navier is unlocking all these opportunities. And for someone who calls like Seattle home, that like I was like, wow, like I've taken the ferries my whole life. I never thought we could like, use new technology to make this so much better and change so much more. And also like New York City, I feel like would be so like getting from Jersey to New York is impossible. Yes, so you unlock new real estate, new economic like opportunities when you can like get places easier. So I feel like that's so just the way this could transform our cities 100%. Is so cool.
I mean, that is, exactly. I mean, when you talk about like, why do we work so hard? It's not that it's always everything's fun, right? But it is like when you close your eyes and you say, wow, the impact of this technology at scale will actually change the world. The same ways railways, airways did, we now actually have an opportunity to fundamentally change how coastal cities run and operate. What means is like you're in New York, you're in San Francisco, you are you're fed up with traffic, you're talking about lack of affordable housing, and you're like, well, you're also talking about lack of access to talents as employers. So suddenly, when you think about it, right, Alameda, as I was talking about, and there's other places like that, which is like probably 30% cheaper to live than, most of San Francisco. Now I can work in San Francisco, I can work in Oyster Point and live somewhere that is safe, also like cheaper and more affordable housing. You can also live in like Marine, which is like, okay, I want more space to live in, but I also don't want to commute like, 1.5 hours. So even going parallel along the bay, you can cut out on the traffic, right? And the second thing is that, as we are looking at more employee-specific shuttles, like water shuttles, you will be able to work on your way to work. Like, you're not just, spending all your time driving. So you're actually increasing your productive hours.
Yeah. And another thing that's really impressive about Navier is not just the product itself, so much potential and this partnership with Stripe, but the speed at which you've done it. It's only a few years that you've been working on this design. Like I think you said that you came up with 2 boats in like 14 months or something. So that just seems crazy to me. So I want to kind of unlock what's in the DNA of Navier that allows you to move so quickly. Because I thought this was crazy. I was like, this is out of sci-fi. Like it's a plane, but it's a boat. Like, and so to just bring it to market so quickly. And then I wrote it today and it was like beautiful. Like it was comfy seats. It had like nice wood grain. Like it had all these fancy controls and stuff. Like it was really impressive, honestly. So, tell us a little bit about, Navier, the history of Navier.
Yeah, I mean, out of grad school, I was pretty convinced that I was going to build a company in the maritime sector. But when I was, starting on Navier, obviously, like going and raising money and saying that this is a venture scalable business, that, maritime is something like the next thing was actually much harder. I often say that was harder than actually building. So we actually started building in January 2022 when we have, raised our, little bit of the initial money. Mm-hmm. But I think the difference, why we got to do what we got to do and in the timeline is that we did not try to match patterns. So we did not say that, hey, to build a company, we need to when we went there, investors were like, oh, you need tens of millions of dollars. It will take 5 to 7 years to get to a 30 feet of flying boat. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, that's what they're used to seeing. They're used to seeing a software not being developed till you raise like $20 million kind of, right? Yeah. So I think the thing to us was that, okay, if this is the result we want, I knew that I need this boat. Within a year, I want to see it fly, and I want to build this full-scale boat. How do we do it? The thing was, okay, you break down the problem into specifics, okay, who is the best at building, let's say, hydrofoils? Who have built it? Break down the problems of okay, who built the best foil control system? So I built a team in a pretty unconventional way. It was not like I raised a bunch of money and say, oh, let's hire everybody from Tesla because I hired a bunch of Tesla engineers to build the next foiling boat and it's a cool headline, right? Yeah. No, you're very
would have fooled me with that. Like, I would have been like, wow, that sounds cool.
But it's interesting. It is very important to be very specific. Like, break down the problem. A hydrofoil electric boat, you need somebody who's super good in that kind of specific flight controls, right? You need someone who has built carbon fiber boat, and you need someone who is really good at building the best foils. So, and that was my task, like bringing each of them. And then, the way we did it was like, I did not care who I was hiring full-time, part-time, in-house, out-house, none of that. The key focus was like, the outcome I want is the best performance boat, and it doesn't matter how I have to hire them, get those people to build the parts and the things we need to get this working.
And I think it's so cool. Also, it's like engineering focused. It sounds like that's really the culture, is like lead with the engineering and the product. And you do no marketing, but if you Google like flying boat or Navier, like all these crazy videos pop up, and like there's all this buzz, it seems like, with no marketing. So I feel like that's such a cool kind of like pattern that we look for in companies. It's like, wow, like people really want this thing. Like if you can build it, like it seems like there's so much excitement and demand. And that kind of goes into my next question of like, playing devil's advocate. It's like, okay, like we see a lot of these electric companies where it's like, it's a flashy prototype. They get a ton of buzz. Everyone writes an article about how crazy it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And then there's that quote from Tesla and Elon in the back of everyone's mind of like, prototypes are easy, production is hard. Mm-hmm. How do you go from a couple boats, which you built in record time and are crushing it, but how do you go beyond that into kind of like making it economically viable and changing like with Tesla, it was always kind of like butts and seats. Like how many rides can we replace a gas car with an electric car? That's really the metric that matters. So I wonder with Navier, it's similarly like how many rides can you disrupt? How many new routes, instead of in traffic, how many minutes of traffic can you save? So I'm curious how you're thinking about the kind of scale problem and production problem. So
I'll start with the first thing, right? We don't have marketing team and all that stuff. The product is cool, so people like it, right? They put a bunch of videos out there. When you talk about building the next generation American maritime company, it's and these are clean, scalable fleets, right? Introducing a new product into a market that is a very age-old market, right? A legacy market, essentially, right? It means that you have to build a very compelling product. It can't be just a cool toy. Right? So that means that what are the things that people who are trying to switch from whatever gas alternative are looking for, especially when you're looking also at commercial operators, right? One is obviously range, and the second is reliability. So when I tell my team the things we really want to excel at is like, you can't just build a product that's a little bit better. You have to build a product. I mean, I think even, Elon said somewhere this, but you have to build product that's a step function better, that actually compels somebody like, hey, I want to make a switch. And it's just not just a better product. What is great about this product is sustainability and profitability goes hand in hand. That from operator's perspective, it is like, 10x cheaper to operate electric hydrofoiling boat versus traditional gas boat. And also, like, when you're looking at, like, okay, if they were going just electric boat, I mean, there's a range problem, right?
Yeah.
So you really have to solve the problem.
Well, and that's operational cost per mile. Mm-hmm. Is the upfront cost of your boat higher too? So I wonder if that's like, how do you think about that piece of the equation?
Exactly.
Because there's so much of the economics component,
So now, the way I think of it is that, okay, for Navier to win, and actually Navier to actually be built and scale, right? You have to actually solve three distinct problems. The first problem, you have to build a product that's way superior than anything that's out there, that's very compelling, right? So, the team did an excellent job, like at the, the first round of, prototypes and the pre-production boats we have built. Mm-hmm. But you can build a great product and it can cost a fortune, and that will never survive in the market, right? So the second problem, which is 10 times harder than the first problem, actually, is a production problem. Mm-hmm. So can you actually now build the best product, and can you build it at an unbeatable cost? And that's really, so when I say that we are a very engineering-focused company, because The second problem is now, which is getting into DFM, design for manufacturing, is exactly focusing that how do we build this best boat, but now we have to make sure that it is accessible. And if we want to be a global company, that means that it is affordable worldwide, right? So that's exactly the phase we are on.
And so how do you, like, maybe if you could go into a little more of the details of that, because it's such a balancing act of like raising capital, being super efficient, but it's also like a boat that costs $500,000 or $1 million. Is it cheap to build? So how do you balance the, and I know a lot of your early customers have to put up like 50% of the capital to order a boat. So I feel like that solves some of the like cash flow issues, but how do you think about, that just seems like such an insane problem, the kind of like balance of 100%. Getting enough capital and then slowly bringing everything in-house and vertically integrating with the manufacturing and rebuilding how boats are built, kind of. So I'm curious if you have any more details on like that kind of balancing act.
Sure. The first thing was like, at every stage you have to pick one problem that you want to like really nail. And then, you have to stage all your problems, in steps, right? It's all about solving problems one after another, and that makes it fun. So the first thing is that when we go into production, I talked to you about DFM, and I know often I get the question is like automation, and everybody thinks automation is
Isn't a robot going to build this? Perfect. Like, that'll decrease costs.
So it's a staged approach. The first thing is really simplifying your design. So you're in a phase where you're looking at this, well, the boat looks very pretty, but there is lots of molds and stuff that are like literally, unnecessarily complicated because you wanted it to look pretty. So you have to like really get your engineers. So it starts from everything, simplifying designs. That's just on I'm talking about like the boat shape, hulls design, but also a lot of the other stuff in architecture. That's basically what we call design for manufacturing. Simplify what you don't need, just throw it out.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's the first stuff. That from a human perspective, like it should be a simple design and functional. Then you can make it pretty. But the second part of it is, some of this obviously costs come down with, volume. Like for example, at a single boat, like the powertrain cost a lot. I'll give you the number. It's over $100,000 when we built a powertrain, when you build one boat.
Yeah.
But it's not a different powertrain. It's not very different from your Model Y powertrain. So the thing is that at scale, and EV as it's getting commoditized, right, costs going to come down. So there is a staged approach of how you bring and what you bring in-house and what you keep out-house. I'm excited to share, actually, we had a target of getting to a particular gross margin per unit by the end of next year. And my engineering team actually made some incredible breakthrough. And actually, we are reaching, positive gross margins in our first batch of sales.
Yeah, which is really cool. That's really hard to do.
Yeah, so it is a very thoughtful process. And then, it is about like, okay, how do you use automation? Like, you got to use automation where you have a very big leverage, and you have to be very mindful of when you're using automation and what stage and for what. Labor costs are expensive, but it's always a proportion. If something is considerably cheaper for a human to do than, integrating a robot, and the payback period is like, a million years. You don't want to do that. So those are the things you have to be very mindful as you do automation. But what I wanted to come back to is that the approach we are taking is really building next generation scalable fleets. That is, think about the skateboard approach in EVs.
Yeah.
And that's where, repeatable, really scalable platforms. So these are almost marine platforms.
Really cool. And so why now with Navier? Because hydrofoil, that's kind of been a thing. Maybe that seems like a good segue of like, why is now the moment to build this company and this product and scale it?
Yeah, actually, this happened more like in my school as I was building, got into maritime, while building underwater drones and whatnot. What I noticed was, and what we have been noticing, right? There are few key technology drivers that are really pushing innovation, like a next wave of, vehicles when it comes to like land, air, or even for space, right? And if you really look into it, the key technology drivers that you see are, number one is, you're looking at cheaper, faster computing, sensing technologies, right? I mean, the computers, back when you had the hydrofoils, the Boeing jet foil, I mean, the computers were millions of dollars. You would probably using vacuum tubes in your engine room for your control systems. So now you have cheaper, faster computing and sensing. The second thing is obviously electrification, right? That's pushing the next wave of vehicles, that all vehicles going to become electric. And then you're having scalable manufacturing, with the new wave of automated factories, right? I mean, as we say, factories themselves will become products in a way. So when you look at that, those key technology drivers, that technology stack, how they influence land, air, and others, the question was obviously, this will also impact maritime. And, there has not been a lot of innovation. And it's mind-blowing that when you apply this technology stack to maritime, it is not about just a fundamental or incremental change. It will actually transform the whole industry, because suddenly we have the tools to build scalable marine fleets that are, drastically lower in operational cost. And that, not only just for people, for goods, it will just change how we look at the waterways. And when you call it why now, it is now when we can actually build these fleets at scale in a reliable way, which was not possible before.
And it seems like you're riding this wave of American innovation and these next generation of American startups that are kind of building the future and bringing manufacturing back with advanced technology, like Build It in America. Like, I just feel like that's, can you talk a little bit about that side of the company as well? Because I feel like we're seeing a bunch of startups like that, pop up. Like Lightship is another one we're an investor in. That seems similar, like electrified hardware products made in America, really driven by software.
Yeah. It's interesting why this is happening in America, right? You would say before this, vehicles and stuff where a lot of them are built, overseas and so on. I think it comes back to the same why now question, is because the kind of the technology stack that you need, right? So if you think of our boat, right, it's the skill sets of aerospace engineering to robotics to sensing, autonomy, and software. Where else would you find that other than, let's say, Silicon Valley, Boston, or somewhere like that, right? So it is. It's not the skills that you would find in among legacy boat builders either. So the thing is, America, I think traditionally, it's not a great place if you're building very labor-intensive stuff. But we are at a really interesting inflection point where, as we are moving into this whole era of, sensor-driven, software-driven platforms, that's where this country actually excels in. And as we are going from more manual processes, look at, the humanoid robots to automated factories that, people are building today, focusing on, that will be the thing. That's where, America is way ahead. And it's really cool because this will lead to so many opportunities, because people are talking about, people losing jobs. And I see no, there's a huge opportunity, huge markets, is going to be developed around these. And that's super exciting.
And this brings me back to this Elon Musk tweet about an electric flying boat that he did a while ago. Because obviously I'm a big Tesla fan, and just this whole idea of everything's going to go electric, and Navier seems like it's really kind of the next generation electric form factor for boating. And I saw there was a rumor that Elon Musk took a ride in your boat. So I'm curious, did that happen? How did that go? Was he hyped about it? Because, that says a lot. He's a next level engineer. If he thinks the design is cool, then.
Maybe he did. You should ask him.
That's it? No comment?
You should ask him.
Okay. We'll take that as a yes. And when we had our first conversation about Navier, you mentioned all these other crazy form factors. I know you're focused on this 6 to 12 passenger water taxi for now, but I also thought, actually also just now when we were talking, you were saying Navier is really just about the most efficient way to get from point A to B. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of working backwards that you got to that platform.
Yeah.
But I'm so curious of just for a second if we could talk about like the vision of like the crazy stuff like that you could build with this technology. Like you mentioned a single container barge or like a 30 passenger boat, which seems insane after being on this one. I'm like, it's so big, it flies. Like imagine one that's way bigger than a 30-foot boat that fly. Like that's just going to be a wild experience. So what are these kind of crazy moonshot designs and visions that you have for Navier?
Yeah, I mean, at the core, we want to build scalable platforms, and the focus is like, how do you move things, people, goods, whatever it is, like on the water from point A to B in the most efficient, cost-effective, and obviously sustainable way. That's the core focus. And at whatever, whether that's, a hydrofoil is obviously the obvious choice in this case. And for electric boats, I at least in the first wave, I will say that there is no other better choice. If you really want electric boats with range, that's how you have to go for it. So the way I see it is, building this transportation network out with these kind of boats, every marina becomes a transportation hub, right? And first you move people, but eventually there's no reason not to move goods. Like, why are we stuck on a traffic with these big trucks when you can move the container on the water, point A to B, on an autonomous barge? And you can do that very efficiently. So short sea shipping, for example, is a massive market. And, I do see us, even moving beyond people to moving goods. And initially, we see the market, of course, coastal, because obviously, as you're building electric, all the infrastructure is on the coast, all the charging and all of that. But eventually, obviously, we will move beyond coastal to the, island routes and even, hopefully transoceanic.
Wow, that's crazy. And I've always, maybe you can shoot down why this idea is a dumb idea. I've had this vision of like Tesla making the world's biggest cargo ship with like hundreds and hundreds of little cargo things. And it's like, kind of looks like a Cybertruck. And then it like gets to the ocean on a sunny day. It just like shoots out these solar wings and like charges up. Cause I would assume it would need to like charge up to get there. I don't know. That probably won't work, but I'm just curious, like what is cause we're in the bay and I saw these massive barges from China, I guess, or all over the world. And I'm curious, like, how do we electrify those? Or what's is that even possible to make a zero emission cause you're kind of saying that now, like transoceanic.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously with batteries you cannot put so many batteries. I mean, you can swap batteries and whatnot, put lots of batteries on the bottom of the boat. And then when it goes to the other side, you swap them. I mean, that could be, one way of doing that. People are doing, hydrogen fuel and whatnot. I do think the idea that we are very interested and, we believe a lot in is that often you're building these big boats because of the economies of scale, right? Because it's cheaper. So, for example, hydrofoils, I mean, it's obviously drastically lower your operational costs. So if you can, instead of building big boats, if you can build smaller and more frequent boats, that's actually a game changer, and that is something that we see is a big opportunity. That you can actually have faster hydrofoil boats that are smaller than instead of having hundreds of containers, you can have a smaller number, more frequent, so you can actually get have some flexibility on how frequently you get your things.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is a big opportunity at that, and that actually would be almost like, time-wise. I mean, you can be in a couple within a few days of an aircraft almost. So I think there is a big opportunity there, like
really
smaller
cool.
And more frequent.
And also autonomous. That's something we haven't talked about, but that seems like core to Navier's roadmap.
Right.
But I also would be like, kind of challenge that of like every startup says they're going to be, oh, well, this is cool, but wait till we make it self-driving, And so what's your, like, how does that go from like a buzzword to manifesting in the product?
Yeah. I think autonomy has too much buzz hype, but then also some kind of people have regrets related to that. I think the best part of a Navier is that Navier our vessels don't need to be autonomous to generate value. I mean, the profitability, scalability, none of that depends on us being autonomous. Autonomous is obviously is a cherry on the top in the sense, obviously captains cost a lot. I mean, on the boat. And as operators, if you want to scale a fleet of this, you can have a single captain that probably oversees like 10 of those. So when we go to that kind of scaling, obviously autonomy brings a lot of value. And, in the Stripe demo, for example, the Stripe pilot we are doing, I mean, we will be gathering a lot of data, fixed route data. And some of these pilots we are doing is actually to learn, gather data for the things we are building on the self-driving side. The first feature actually we are releasing, as you know, is the one-click auto docking. You should come back and try it, and it will be this year itself.
Wow.
And that's for that's a very useful feature for those who drive a boat. But then fixed route autonomy especially for like water taxis is in some ways is I would say simpler problem than self-driving cars because of course there are new kinds of problems, but then that are not on the road. But overall, it's a step function simpler in many ways.
What's so crazy is ever since I've heard of Navier, I feel like every time I look at a waterway or I'm eating food next to the water in Seattle, like it's changed how I think of it. Like I'm already thinking I'm like, ooh, what if that's a dock? And then we have a Navier and it's going there and then I could get there. And then like my friends who live in LA, imagine if they didn't have to drive in traffic, but all these piers were marinas where you could like just hop to all the neighborhoods along the coast and like go to some, wine tasting and not worry about your car driving, Just walk on a boat. Like that would be a game changer. So I'm kind of thinking maybe we could end with like what's next for Navier. Like, is there anything the Stripe partnership's launching? You're about to deliver the first customer boats. It sounds like the first wave of production's already sold out. Where can people find out more and kind of what are you most excited about for what's next for Navier?
Production is, I love solving problems. My team loves solving problems. So I think really hitting our production milestones and, getting through all of our DFM and having that production playbook nailed down is a super exciting milestone for us.
Yeah.
Just even, strategizing with the team. That's what gets me excited. Like, how do we build this? How do we go from the first 10 to the 100 and the 400? And, how do we think of doing that efficiently and beat our timeline? And, that's something that I'm super excited about. But also super excited also about the different partnerships that are still not in the news yet. But we are signing up a bunch of other partners that for really scaling the mobility part of it. And because
really
I think
cool.
more people are reading about, and to more and more people it's making sense. And in terms of impact, a 30-passenger boat, especially shuttling people, right, employees, can take about over 120 cars off the road. So the impact of that, just not in terms of reducing traffic, reducing carbon footprint, increasing people's productivity overall, not being tired after driving through traffic, it's immense. And I think that really will help us build better cities and better communities overall, people traveling together, even I think that can be really meaningful for different workplaces. So, excited to see a future when you can go to Sausalito and get a quick, go to Sam's for a dinner and take the Navier boats and all of this zipping around in the bay.
Yeah. It's super exciting to think about where Navier is going to be in 10 years because that's like a test that we do for startups that we want to invest in. It's like, are we excited? Like if we fast forward 10 years and I was 10 years in the future, would I be excited to check back in on that startup? And I'd be like, oh my God, I can't even believe, that's what I think about Navier. It's like, it could be a 30-passenger ferry is all of a sudden launching. There's all these water taxis going around. Now there's containers that are being moved around on the water. Truly unlocking all of that is such a cool vision. And I feel like that it kind of got me super excited and inspired of how many startups that we look at. It's like, oh, it's like this AI bot to help you do sales, or we're doing this, or it's just so untangible. And the amount of capital that this takes, 10, 50, $100 million, in the grand scheme of the capital markets and the world financials, is just such a tiny drop in the bucket. But when you think about the delta that I could have on the future of unlocking the potential of waterways, it's super exciting. and inspiring. And that's why, like, shout out to you for grinding on this mission and like actually doing something cool that could really move the needle. Because we don't see it that often, and it's super exciting. Like riding the boat today, I'm like, holy shit! Like Navier got so many smart people to try and tackle this problem of what's the cheapest, fastest, smoothest way to move on the water, and they're actually like bringing it to life. And I'm riding on it right now, and it's just kind of a surreal moment to like feel like you're on the future. I don't know if I'm doing a good job describing it, but there's so few products where it's like I feel like I'm getting a taste of like the future. When I'm riding on it.
I fundamentally believe that this is one of the most important companies that we can build right now in America. And I would not, I spend a fair deal amount of time in academia working on hard things. And I choose to work on this. And I would not if I did not fundamentally believe that this is a really important thing to work on, not just to build better cities for the country as a whole, for an industry as a whole. And whether it was us doing it, whether it was somebody doing it, this is the time to build America's next generation maritime company. This is the time to build the fleets. This will transform, just not the cities, but much, much beyond, and obviously globally. So it will keep me very, very busy for next decades. But I think it's worth it. I think hard problems are worth solving, because if you solve them, they do make a big difference.
Yeah. And it's so cool because you think about these early adopters, like, oh, they're spending $500,000 or $1 million, these customers who are buying the Navier. And it's like, oh, it's a toy, but it's almost like when you see Navier, you shouldn't see it as a toy. You should see it as like this tool to change the future. And these early adopters, I feel like the customers often don't get enough shout outs of like, I know a lot of your customers are like early Tesla customers,
yes.
like all those
90%
people,
probably.
Yeah. Like all those people buying the Roadster and the Model S, like that goes to making the technology cheaper and to spreading
100%.
the innovation. So
we are so grateful.
So you got to give a shout out to these people who are
gosh.
like, if you have $1 million, I mean, there's no better way to support the future and look cool than have one of these Naviers. That's what I'm saying. Like, if I had 10 million, I would definitely be spending $1 million on it. But like,
I mean, it's less than $1 million, but I think we are so grateful to our customers, because I mean, they are. I mean, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to take a chance on a little company with a bunch of like nerds working.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's also a beauty of. Being where we are, because there are people who really believe in innovation, who believe in building a better world, and they get behind you, and they see you working hard and making progress, and the momentum keeps on building up. So obviously big shout out to our customers. I mean, whether that's like the companies we are partnering with, whether that's Stripe, whether our early customers who have bought our boats. I mean, we are so immensely grateful, and it gets us excited to get them built, and looking forward to getting them delivered in a couple months.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time, and can't wait to see Navier just take off in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.